Hi, everyone. I'm really pleased to have with me because it's been so long in the making, this interview. This is Jenny Smith. Jenny's the Family Daycare Coordinator of the ECEC Directorate in the Department of Education. Good evening, Jenny. How are you?
Hi, Lisa. How are you? It's great to come along and have a chat with you tonight.
It sure is good for us to hear directly from the department about a topic as important as risk. So tell us, first of all, where is serious incidents happening in family daycare? What is the data telling us about where risk exists in family daycare?
Yeah, I'm going to try and talk nice and slow for you, Lisa, because I do have a tendency to speed up, especially when I'm talking about things that are interesting to us, and the family daycare space and risk and what's happening for our little people is always something that's very exciting for me. The data is really consistent with what we know from our observations and our visits to family daycare educators. So the data clearly shows that the highest risk or incidents in family daycare are your normal harms and hazards. So your trips, your falls, children being locked out of or inside of the service, children missing or unaccounted for, attendance of emergency services, incidents where medical attention was sought or ought to have been sought, and your general illness in children. I think COVID has certainly hit many of the children and people right across the world, not only New South Wales and our sector. And then your incident traumas, particularly around trips, falls, broken equipment, falls from broken equipment, access to items that could cause harm and hazard. So really, when we're looking at the law and reg section 167, also another high risk area, I guess, for us is sleep and rest. So in particular, Reg 81, where it looks at the appropriateness of sleep and safe sleep practices, Regulation 170, which is about following your policies and procedures, and then obviously harms and hazards and supervision all fall into that safe sleep practices and processes, and increases the risk when it comes to what we're seeing when we're observing practices both in our visits and in our data.
Okay, so let's look at your visits more. When when your people go out to family daycare services, like that's a whole heap of things that you've listed there. What are the absolute main ones that they're noticing on their visits and spot checks?
Yeah, sure. So these aren't an exhaustive list, but these are some of the common things that we often see. So as I said a minute ago, unsafe sleep practices. So we see children sometimes sleeping in prams or bouncers or baby rockers or bassinets. So that's not good things and don't comply with safe sleep practices with SIDS. Chemicals, so chemicals accessible in bathrooms, laundries, emergency exits, so those spaces that are used by and accessible to children, including walkways when children are going through a space to get to an approved space. So if they're going through an indoor space to go to an approved outdoor space, so it's checking those environments that the children travel through, as well as the approved spaces that they're in regularly. Unsafe equipment such as exposed wirings from walls, broken toys, items in kitchens or bathrooms that should be out of reach. So a classic one is safety latches on fridges, freezers, cupboards, doors, but you pull on them and they just open straight up. So there's no value in having a safety latch.
So you got it there, but it just doesn't quite work.
Yeah, it just doesn't quite work, or it's broken, or the cupboard still opens anyway. So that's another one. Dangling electrical cords, so plugged in and turned on. So, your mobile phone cords, your computer cords, all those kind of things that are found really commonly in people's houses everywhere, but just need to be out of reach and not accessible to children when providing family daycare. But then we move to the outdoor environment. So things like broken fences, exposed nails, gaps in the fence, which can create escape risks, uneven and damaged pavers, which create trip hazards, gardens, so in an approved outdoor space. So things such as toxic plants, it's a really common thing that when educators move to a new residence or a service does a assessment of a property, just check the plants as well, because it's one of the ones that we often miss.
Is there a list of, photos of toxic plants, for those of us that might move and don't know, a hemlock from a...
Yes, there is. And I'm pretty sure it's on the Kids Safe website. So I'm pretty sure you can
Right. Okay.
Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it is. And there's a
I hope
photo.
It's got photos of them as well, because I think that's necessary. Okay, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Keep going.
No, that's okay. Construction materials. So when people are renovating, just make sure any tools or construction materials are well out of the way. And then obviously a risk for us is around documentation, such as all of your records, your enrolment records, your child attendance records, your risk assessments, your authorisations, your medical management plans. So if they're either not present or not available at the Education and Care Service, or they're incomplete or inaccurate. So obviously the purpose of these documents is that the information is accurate and it's readily accessible in the event of an emergency. So when it's not, that creates a greater risk if an educator was to need to contact a parent in emergency, refer to a medical management plan, etc.
It feels like that's a really, really long list of things for everyone to look after. How do you manage to constantly be aware of so much risk?
Look, I agree with you, Lisa, and it's not an easy task, but that's where your home safety inspections really come into place. Most of those things that we listed would form part of your indoor and outdoor safety checks to start with. And then for the documentation, most services generally have processes and procedures in place to make sure that the documents are up to date. They're checked regularly by your coordination unit and that you have everything that you need, including those conversations you have with families to update your records.
Okay, so let's move on to risk assessments. We know that, everyone now knows how to do it in excursion ones because we have to do those so often. What other risk, assessments or risk minimisation plans do family daycare educators need to have?
Yeah, so some of the risk assessments that people might consider, you're correct, the excursion risk assessment and the risk minimisation ones are required under the law and regulation, as are the transport risk assessments. So they would be the three that I would say to people you have to have as a minimum, because that's prescribed under the law and regs. With transport, consider things such as walking to and from school, walking to and from a park, for instance. So often people get the transport in the car or the bus, but they forget the transport between walking locations such as the school down the road or the park around the corner that the educators and children often attend. The other thing with risk transport is also all of the spaces that you're transporting children. So often we'll see educators will have the risk assessments and the authorisations to transport between the child's school and the educator's home, but they'll also transport the children to their own home, and they've just not got the authorisation from the educator's house to the child's own house. So it's just making sure that all of those areas that you're transporting children are covered. So that would probably be one of the first ones I would suggest. Sleep and rest. So sleep and rest risk assessments that are individual to the needs of the children and that have been developed in conjunction with families and the coordination team. So we would encourage, I suppose, families and educators and coordination units to work together to develop risk assessments around sleep and rest for children to make sure that you're considering the specific needs of each child. So some children might have a medical condition that require additional monitoring or additional supports in the safe sleep space that needs to be considered and reflected in that risk assessment. What's really important for safe sleep risk assessments is that you also review them regularly, because as we know, children grow up, and the sleep and rest assessment that you maybe when they were 6 months old, may not be relevant when they're 18 months old, or in fact when they're a preschooler. So it's really important that those documents are reviewed regularly and that they reflect the needs of the child at the time that the care is being provided. Other risks.
Would you expect a sleep risk assessment for every child in a centre-based service?
Best practice would be that you've had those conversations even in a centre-based service, because each child's needs are individual, and the law and regulations do say that it's appropriate to the sleep and rest needs of each child. So it would be, and Red Nose certainly suggests that risk assessments are conducted for each child that has a sleep and rest need in an education and care service.
Okay.
How you do that and how you maintain that is entirely up to you. I guess in family daycare setting, you've got a smaller number of children, so that's something that could possibly be easily
yeah, but you've only got the one educator to do all these risk assessments too.
Yeah, that's true. That's where your coordination unit and your families come into play as well. Okay,
so what innovative ways have you seen that some people control risks in family daycare?
Yep. I guess there's lots of different innovative ways that people are controlling risk. So I guess I didn't actually finish my risk question. If we can just
sorry, go back to that.
Sorry, Lisa, because I was just going to add there as well that risks for potential emergencies need to be specific to the educator's residence. So that's a common thing that we come across. It's okay to have some things that might be standard or generic across the different residences, but there's going to be stuff that's specific. So an educator in a rural or remote area that has access to jams, their risk assessment is where snakes are something that is a real possibility, is going to look very different to a unit or a townhouse in a metropolitan city. So it's just about having a look at those risk assessments and making sure they're specific to that individual educator. Shared driveways, school zones and things like that create extra risk at certain times of the day with increased traffic. So it's just considering those kind of things when you're developing your risk plans around emergencies for educators. The other thing I'd say with managing risk is just that it's physical, how important your physical checks are in the day before children come into care. So just making sure again that it's a good thing to identify risk. So sometimes people think, oh, it's going to look bad on me if I identify a risk. It's actually a really proactive thing. So we would actually encourage people to write them on their home safety checklist, to write them in their visit records and say, this is what we found and this is what we've done to mitigate it, so that we can make sure that we can prevent the risk or reduce it or mitigate it moving forward. So don't shy away from that you found a risk.
Look, I love thinking of all the weird and wacky risks that are out there. I once had to do a risk assessment for an emergency evacuation down a staircase with a whole with a group of office people as well as children. And so I considered the risk of that one of those office people was a pedophile. Now it's an unlikely risk, but I built that into the risk management plan because it's a possibility. Not a very high one, I hope, but it is a possibility.
Yeah, we do hope that's not a high one, but just the ones that are practical to you as well. It doesn't need to be an exhaustive list. We don't want people doing, hundreds of pages of risk assessment. It just needs to be practical. It needs to be useful, and it needs to be purposeful for what you're trying to do. And I think that's the key with documentation. How do we work smarter, not harder, because it doesn't have to equal the same thing. So just make sure whatever your documentation is, that it's meaningful and purposeful for what you're trying to achieve. To your next question about innovative ways, there's lots and lots. I guess some of the really easy innovative ways that I've seen recently and probably in the last few years is just around the application of apps and software. So technology is just, for everybody, it's just extending every day. So there's apps and software that can monitor expiry dates of qualifications, medications. They can send you alerts and reminders. So some of those things I've seen services really embrace, as well as being able to communicate in real time with their educators through some of those apps, which is can be really helpful when educators are notifying that they're sick, or indeed the children are sick, or they're not providing care on a certain day. So just, I'd say, don't be afraid of technology and how it might be able to enhance the connections you have with your children and your families and your coordination unit. The other thing I'd say in terms of any innovation or any strategies that people look to put in place just don't forget the action part of it. So often we have all these great ideas, but without being able to put it in action, it's just an idea. So, you know, define the purpose, look at what the strategies are that you're wanting, ensure they're effective, review them regularly to ensure that they continue to meet your needs as an educator for your children and your service, because they're unique in each setting. So that's what I would say in terms of innovation. And always a little bit of a plug there, Lisa. Check out our website as well as the Family Daycare New South Wales website. There's lots of information around.
So look, in residences, what are the risks that services, you keep calling them the old name of coordination unit, but we try and use the word services now, need to be checking before they take a new educator on?
Yeah, so there's lots of things a service can check before they take on a new educator. Certainly the physical premises is a minimum requirement under Regulation 116. So that's to check the physical parts of the approved learning spaces. But in addition to that, things such as the educator's age, the qualifications, the experience of the educator, whether they're going to have an educator assistant, past employee history and previous non-compliance. So you could, where that's applicable, you could ask for references, you could ask to talk to the previous service if that's part of your service's policies and procedures, because we know some educators do move between services. So you might want to know as much information about the educator as you can before you take them on, the nature of the care that they're going to provide. So that's a really important one, and whether that meets the needs of your service as well. So if you're a service that has predominantly children in before and after school care, or predominantly in the middle of the day, or a mixture, which is what we see most often, is a mixture of care types, whether overnight and weekend care is something that your service is able to support as well. So there are considerations when looking at or engaging an educator, or the main things such as, you know, you're working with children checks, your police checks. A lot of services will do an assessment of knowledge. So they'll do a bit of an interview with the educators. They'll assess their knowledge of the law and regulations, and what supports that the educator is looking for from their scheme, from their service, you know, because that's important as well, that the service and the educator are able to meet each other's needs and in turn meet the needs of the children. Some services we've seen do employee declarations, and obviously things such as first aid, and all the other qualifications that go with being able to provide.
What would the employee declarations have?
Yeah, so sometimes I've seen declarations that ensure there's no enforceable actions or undertakings in place, that the educator hasn't had any prohibition notices, or that they haven't had any non-compliance under the national law and regulations in relation to the prospective educator. So some services do that. That's an individual choice, but I guess what you're looking for is as much information as you can in terms of being able to assess the educator to see if they're a good fit for your service and whether your service is a good fit for the educator. So it goes both ways.
And what about actual residences? Like, what are the things that they're really checking in residences? You know, like what kind of safety issues, I suppose, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, certainly all your physical environments. So the indoor and outdoor space. So in the outdoor space, things such as swimming pools, spas, water hazards, fencing, as well as your indoor spaces. So what are the indoor spaces? Bathrooms, kitchens, inaccessible? Do they have the safety latches? So Regulation 116 lists a whole long list of things to consider when it comes to the physical environment for both the indoor and the outdoor environments.
Okay, great. Can I just ask, given that we've got someone who's so in touch with family daycare, we're noticing more and more people are posting on Pinterest and stuff like that, pictures of their family daycare, which is now run out of a separate space within their house. Is that happening more and more, in your opinion, or?
People posting more?
No, rather than using the whole of the house to provide family daycare, they're providing like a playroom or a workshop out the back of their house or something?
I would have to say the learning spaces are the approved learning spaces. So it would be rare that the entire house would be an approved learning space for most educators, because there's things such as their bedrooms and things that they don't probably want as part of their family daycare residence. Some people have, more than one bathroom, so they just have one bathroom that's designated as part of the family daycare. I would say that most people have their own family daycare set up to meet their needs and the needs of their children and their families. So for them, it might mean 2 or 3 spaces in their home. It might mean larger areas. It really is an individual choice based on what's going to work for the educator and their family in their home setting. So it's not a real one-shop answer there. Sorry, Lisa.
Okay, no problems. Well, thank you for that. I must admit it's a bit daunting when you hear everything that, is of risk. So I hope that people aren't, depressed at the end of this. I hope they feel that they can actually manage to look at those risks and deal with them appropriately.
Yeah, and I think it's about getting started and going, okay, what are my risks and what can I do about them, and working with your services to be able to have those conversations. So don't think you have to solve all the world's problems in one day. Just take one at a time and focus on what are your priorities and work with your service around meeting those needs and meeting the requirements under the law and regulations to mitigate and minimise risk for children.
Okay, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, everyone.